The clock tower chimed 12 times, each echo ringing out across the silent rooftops. Midnight had arrived, and with it, a hush fell over Milltown. A full moon hung in the sky like a giant glowing eye, watching over every corner of the sleeping town. Its pale silvery light washed over Milltown, making the shadows stretch long and thin, twisting into strange shapes that danced across the cobblestones. Everything was still, too still. Not even a stray cat prowled the alleys, and the air felt heavy, as if the whole town was holding its breath. 10-year-old Daniel shivered, pulling his dressing gown tighter around his small frame, trying to keep out the chill that seemed to seep from the very walls. He shouldn't be awake. Not at this hour, when everyone else was deep in their dreams and the world outside felt so strange and unfamiliar. But a strange noise had woken him, a soft, scratching sound coming from the attic, just above his head, persistent and impossible to ignore. Daniel's parents were fast asleep, lost in their own peaceful world, unaware of the mystery unfolding in the house. He knew they wouldn't believe him about the noise, no matter how real it sounded to his ears. They'd say it was just the wind, or maybe the old house settling, nothing to worry about at all. But the wind didn't usually sound like claws on wood, scraping and scratching in the darkness above. Something was definitely up there. He just knew it, deep in his bones, and he couldn't ignore it any longer. He tiptoed towards the attic door, each step creaking on the old wooden floor, his breath coming in short, nervous bursts. His heart thumped like a drum in his chest, loud enough that he wondered if whatever was up there could hear it too. What if there was a monster hiding in the darkness, lurking just out of sight, waiting for someone brave or foolish enough to come looking? What if it was waiting for him, right now, just beyond the door, in the shadows where the moonlight couldn't reach? The attic door creaked open, the sound loud in the silent house. Dust motes danced in the beam of Daniel's torch. He held his breath, listening. The scratching had stopped. Maybe it was nothing after all. Then he saw them, two glowing eyes peering down from the rafters. They blinked slowly, their gaze fixed on Daniel. He froze, his blood turning to ice. Whatever was up here, it wasn't friendly. The eyes blinked again, and a low growl rumbled through the attic. Daniel's torch trembled in his hand, casting flickering shadows on the dusty furniture. He had to get out of there, now. He turned and ran, his bare feet pounding on the wooden floor. Behind him, the growling grew louder, closer. Something was chasing him. Daniel scrambled down the attic stairs, his heart pounding so loudly he could barely hear his own footsteps. Every shadow seemed to stretch and reach for him as he fled, the air thick with fear and dust. He slammed the door shut behind him with trembling hands, desperate to put a barrier between himself and whatever was lurking above. But it wasn't enough. He could hear the creature throwing itself against the wood, its guttural growls echoing through the house, rattling the old walls and making the floorboards tremble beneath his feet. Panic rising, Daniel knew he had to warn his parents before it was too late. He shouted for them, his voice cracking with fear, hoping they would hear him over the chaos. But as he raced down the hallway, his breath coming in short gasps, he noticed something strange, something that made him freeze in his tracks. Tiny glowing eyes were appearing in the shadows, multiplying with every second, as if the darkness itself was coming alive. They blinked at him from under the sofa, from behind the curtains, peering out with eerie, unblinking stares. From inside the grandfather clock, more eyes glimmered, watching his every move. They were everywhere. No corner was safe. Each pair of eyes belonged to a small, grotesque creature, their bodies twisted and unnatural, as if nightmares had taken shape. They were made of clay, just like the figures Daniel played with in happier times, but these were warped and menacing, their features contorted into grotesque, mocking smiles that sent chills down his spine. The creatures scuttled out of the shadows, their tiny feet tapping on the floor as they followed Daniel, their glowing eyes never leaving him for a second. He was surrounded, trapped by a growing army of living nightmares. There was nowhere to run, and the trail of tiny terrors was closing in. Daniel backed into a corner, his heart pounding in his chest. The creatures closed in, their tiny claws scraping on the floor. He squeezed his eyes shut, bracing himself for the worst. This was it. This was how it ended. Then, a voice cut through the darkness. "Boo!" Daniel's eyes flew open. Standing before him, grinning mischievously, was his older brother Michael. He held a handful of small clay figures, each with tiny, battery-powered LED eyes. "Gotcha!" Michael laughed, dropping the figures into Daniel's lap. "Did I scare you?" Daniel stared at the harmless figures in his hands. The glowing eyes didn't seem so menacing anymore. He looked back at the shadows, but the creatures were gone. It had all been a prank. Relief washed over Daniel, his tense shoulders finally dropping, but almost instantly, a wave of anger surged up, replacing his fear with frustration and confusion. He clenched his fists, trying to make sense of what had just happened. "Michael!" he shouted, hurling the nearest clay figures at his brother with a mix of outrage and disbelief. The room echoed with the sound of tiny clay bodies hitting the floor. That wasn't funny, but Michael just burst out laughing, clutching his stomach as if it was the best joke he'd ever pulled. His laughter filled the attic, making the shadows seem less menacing. "Aw, come on, little bro, you should have seen your face. I wish I had a camera," Michael teased, still grinning from ear to ear. Then, with a flourish, he pulled a small remote control from his pocket, waggling it in front of Daniel like a magician revealing his secret trick. He pressed a button, and suddenly all the clay figures scattered around the room lit up at once, their tiny eyes blinking in perfect unison. The effect was mesmerizing, almost magical. The attic door creaked open again and a larger, more elaborate claymation monster emerged from the shadows, its eyes glowing ominously as it lumbered into the light. It was both terrifying and impressive. Michael gave a dramatic, theatrical bow, as if he were on stage performing for an audience. "Presenting, the Midnight Monster Mash," he announced, grinning with pride and excitement, his eyes sparkling with mischief. "I've been working on it all week," he added, unable to hide the satisfaction in his voice. Every detail, every moving part, was his handiwork. "What do you think?" Daniel stared from the elaborate monster to the mischievous grin on his brother's face, torn between admiration and annoyance. He couldn't help but crack a smile, his anger melting away as he realized the effort and creativity behind the prank. Maybe this midnight prank wasn't so bad after all. In fact, it was kind of amazing to see what Michael had created. It was actually pretty impressive, more than Daniel wanted to admit out loud. The monster was detailed, creative, and a little bit scary. "Just wait till next time," Daniel muttered, picking up a handful of clay figures, already plotting his revenge for the next round of sibling mischief. He had some ideas of his own, and this time, he was determined to outdo Michael's midnight masterpiece.